At precisely 10 in the morning on Christmas Day, the heavy oak door of the mansion I had secretly bought and paid for was slammed in my face by the son I had given everything to. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the freezing pine-scented air of the gated community. I stood there on the heated marble of the front porch, the wind biting at the collar of my 10-year-old Sunday suit, holding a 20-pound roasted turkey wrapped in 3 layers of aluminum foil and thick towels. I did not pound my fist against the wood. I did not shout his name. I did not shed a single tear. I just stood there, letting the absolute, sub-zero reality of what had just happened wash over me. I didn't know it yet, but that single, violent slam of a door was the sound of my son unknowingly pulling the pin on a grenade he had been holding in his own hands. My name is Thaddeus Moore. I am 70 years old, a retired pipelayer and steel welder who built an empire from the dirt up. My son, Darnell, thought he was discarding a broken, embarrassing old laborer who smelled like grease and poverty. He had no idea he was actually declaring war on the owner of the very ground he stood on, the architect of his entire artificial life. The morning had started with a quiet, naive kind of hope, the kind only a lonely father can muster. I had woken up at 3 in the morning to prepare the turkey. It was Betty's recipe. My late wife had seasoned our Christmas bird with a specific blend of sage, rosemary, and smoked paprika for 40 years. Before she passed away a decade ago, Darnell had held her frail hand and promised he would never let her traditions die. For 10 years, I had kept that promise alive, roasting the turkey and bringing it to wherever he was. The cabin of my rusted 20-year-old Ford F-Mochumnamui had smelled like a memory, rich and earthy. To me, it smelled like love. To the residents of Whispering Pines, an ultra-exclusive enclave where the lawns were manicured with surgical precision and the security guards checked your net worth before your ID, it probably smelled like something that desperately needed to be scrubbed away. I should have known something was wrong the moment I pulled up to the curb of Bonmui High Oakview Drive. The sprawling colonial revival, with its massive white pillars and sweeping bay windows, was a property I knew intimately. I knew it because I had personally inspected the foundation 3 years ago, before authorizing its purchase through a blind shell corporation. Darnell believed he was a marketing genius who had charmed a benevolent, anonymous investor at a networking gala into leasing him the estate for $1 a month. He loved to brag about his negotiating skills, parading his win around his country club. He never once suspected that the anonymous billionaire investor was the same man in grease-stained coveralls who came over on Sundays to snake his drains. I parked my beat-up Ford right behind a gleaming black Mercedes S-Class in the driveway. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hands were rough, permanently scarred and calloused from 50 years of laying municipal pipelines and welding structural steel. I was an old black man in a neighborhood where the police were routinely called if a car drove under the speed limit, but it was Christmas, and I was Darnell's father. I foolishly believed that still carried weight. Walking up the long driveway, the turkey heavy and warm against my chest, I glanced through the massive bay window. The golden glow of a 3-tiered crystal chandelier illuminated a picture-perfect holiday tableau. Darnell stood by the grand stone fireplace, wearing a tailored velvet blazer that easily cost more than the current Blue Book value of my truck. He was holding a glass of amber scotch, laughing. Seated on the cream-colored leather sofa was his wife, Tiffany. She wore a pristine white silk dress and looked like a porcelain doll designed solely for display. Beside her sat her parents, Brent and Susan. They had flown in from the coast, projecting the polished, old-money aesthetic that Darnell was so desperately trying to buy his way into. I reached the door and pressed the brass bell. I heard the melodic chimes echo deep inside the house, followed instantly by the sharp, impatient click of dress shoes on marble. The door swung inward. Darnell filled the frame, but the charming smile he used for his clients was completely absent. He didn't step aside to welcome me in from the cold. He looked at the aluminum foil bundle in my arms, then down at my worn leather boots, and finally up to my face. His expression wasn't just irritated. It was laced with a profound, visceral disgust. "Dad," he hissed, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper so it wouldn't carry back into the living room. "What are you doing here?" I shifted the weight of the heavy bird, forcing a warm smile I didn't feel. "Merry Christmas, son. I brought the bird. Your mother's recipe, just like I promised her. I thought we were eating at 1 o'clock. Darnell ran a manicured hand over his freshly trimmed beard, his eyes darting frantically over his shoulder to his guests, then back to me. He stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door almost entirely shut behind him. A wave of heat escaped from the house, carrying the scent of expensive pine and $100 cologne. "Look, plans changed," Darnell said, refusing to meet my eyes. He stared at a spot somewhere over my left shoulder. "Tiffany's parents are here. Brent and Susan flew in early. This is a formal brunch, Dad. A high-end networking opportunity. Brent is introducing me to some major players in the tech sector this afternoon, and we are setting the tone right now." A coldness began to spread through my chest that had absolutely nothing to do with the winter wind swirling around us. "So, I can't meet them?" I asked quietly. "I put on a tie, Darnell." Darnell let out a short, cruel laugh that sounded like tearing paper. "A tie? Dad, look at you. You drove that scrap metal truck here and parked it right in front of the house. The neighbors are probably already texting the hoe to tow it. And that smell. You smell like grease and old spices. It's embarrassing." "It's sage, Darnell," I corrected him, my voice trembling ever so slightly. "It's your mother's seasoning." "It smells like poverty," Darnell snapped, his facade of polite exasperation completely evaporating. The venom in his voice was startling. "Tiffany's parents are classy people, Dad. They don't understand your world. They don't want to sit across from a man who looks like he just crawled out from under a sink to fix a pipe. You don't fit the aesthetic we are building here. You never have." What happened next severed the last remaining thread of my patience. The door was pulled wider from the inside, and Tiffany appeared. She leaned her blonde head around Darnell's shoulder, wrinkling her nose as the smell of the roasted turkey hit her. "Babe, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet, theatrical concern designed for her parents to hear. She looked at me, her eyes sweeping over my old suit. "Oh, Thaddeus, you brought food. That is so quaint." "Tiffany," Darnell said, stepping subtly between us to block me from her view. "Dad was just leaving. He got the dates mixed up." I looked at my son. I looked at the woman he had married. I saw the pure disdain etched into the tight lines of their faces. Through the gap in the doorway, I could see Brent and Susan peering out from the hallway, holding their wine glasses, watching the scene unfold like it was some sort of reality television show for their personal amusement. Brent actually smirked, raising his glass in a mocking little toast to my humiliation. "Darnell," I said, dropping my tone until it was dangerously low and steady. "I am your father. I paid for your college when you almost flunked out. I bailed you out when you crashed your first car. I am the only family you have left on this earth." Darnell's face hardened into a mask of pure resentment. He leaned in close, the smell of the aged scotch heavy on his breath. "That is exactly the problem, Dad. You are an anchor. I am trying to sail, and you are dragging me down to the bottom with your blue-collar stories and your pathetic rusty truck. You are not our family anymore. You are a liability. Go away, old man." He stepped back over the threshold and grabbed the heavy brass door handle. Tiffany offered me a small, pitying wave, her eyes dancing with malicious delight. "Go home, Thaddeus," she purred. "We'll send you a holiday card." Then, the heavy oak door slammed shut. I heard the deadbolt slide home with a heavy metallic finality. Through the decorative glass side panel, I watched my son turn back to his guests. I watched him shrug his shoulders and laugh, a performative chuckle to brush off the annoying interruption. I watched Tiffany lean into him, whispering something that made her mother, Susan, throw her head back in laughter. I stood on the porch for a long, silent minute. The turkey was still radiating heat against my chest, but my hands had turned to ice. I looked at the extravagant pine wreath hanging on the door. A wreath I knew for a fact cost $400 because I secretly monitored the credit card statements that paid for it. I looked at the gleaming black Mercedes S-Class parked in the driveway. The car Darnell explicitly told his friends he bought with his massive end-of-year bonus, but was actually leased under my holding company's corporate account. I turned around and walked down the heated driveway. I did not look back. I walked straight to the large, municipal metal trash bin sitting neatly by the curb. I lifted the heavy plastic lid. With a slow, deliberate motion, I unceremoniously dropped the 20-pound, perfectly roasted turkey into the bin. It landed among the garbage with a heavy, sickening thud. 40 years of tradition, dead in an instant. I pulled a handkerchief from my pocket, wiped the grease from my calloused hands, and walked to my truck. I climbed into the cab. The engine roared to life, with its familiar, comforting sputter. I let it idle for a moment, staring through the windshield at the sprawling mansion, They were so safe inside, warm, arrogant, untouchable, and completely ignorant of the tectonic plates shifting directly beneath their feet. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out my smartphone. I didn't open my contacts to call Darnell to beg. I scrolled past the local mechanic. I stopped at a name I hadn't dialed in 2 full years. Reginald Moss. Reggie was the most expensive, most ruthless, most terrifying corporate litigator in the state. He was also the man who had sat back to back with me in the muddy, blood-soaked trenches of Vietnam half a century ago. He picked up on the second ring. Thaddeus. Reggie's voice boomed through the truck's speakers, a rich baritone full of warmth. Merry Christmas, you stubborn old badger. Calling to wish me well? Not today, Reggie, I said. My voice was calm. It was a terrifying, dead calm that I hadn't felt since I was 22 years old and holding a rifle in the jungle. I am sitting outside the primary residential property on Oakview Drive. There was a microsecond of silence on the line. The asset is compromised? Reggie asked, his tone instantly shedding the holiday cheer and shifting into razor-sharp professional alertness. The asset is hostile, I corrected him, watching the snowflakes melt against my windshield. Darnell just evicted me from the premises. He officially declared, I am no longer family. He is currently entertaining unauthorized guests and claiming my resources as his own. The lease agreement, Reggie said softly. The dormant contract we kept in the safe. Clause buona. Termination of agreement upon disrespect, insubordination, or failure to maintain family conduct. It was your specific addition, Thaddeus. I told you it was draconian when we drafted it. And it turns out, it was absolutely necessary, I replied, shifting my truck into park. Execute Protocol Z, Reggie. Burn it down. All of it. I heard the rapid, heavy clacking of a mechanical keyboard on his end of the line. I can have the heavy retrieval team there in 12 minutes. Reggie stated, all business now. I can cut the main financial feed in 3. Are you absolutely sure, old friend? This is the nuclear option. There is no going back from this. I looked through the bay window one last time. I could see Darnell raising his crystal glass high in the air, offering a toast to Brent. He looked like a king standing triumphant in a castle made of clouds. I have never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. Start the clock. I hung up the phone and leaned back against the worn headrest. I didn't drive away. I wanted a front row seat to the apocalypse. I watched the digital clock on my dashboard blink. It was Moore. Moore High AM. At Moore. Moore Lam AM. The first domino was going to fall, and my son was about to learn the true cost of cutting his anchor. I watched the digital clock on my dashboard. Mui, Mui, Bon, Mui, Mui, Lum. The world didn't explode. The sun didn't fall from the sky. But inside that sprawling colonial mansion, the invisible life support system that kept their hearts beating the untraceable flow of my capital had just been severed. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes for a second, the scent of the sage from the discarded turkey still clinging to my jacket. My mind drifted back, not to the betrayal of 5 minutes ago, but to the slow, agonizing rot of the last 3 years. You see, people think betrayal happens in a single moment, like a lightning strike. But I knew better. Betrayal is like rust. It starts in the hidden corners, silent and orange, eating away at the foundation until the whole structure is ready to collapse with a single sneeze. I remembered the day Darnell met Tiffany. He had brought her to my small, cramped apartment on the south side, the same rent-controlled duplex where I'd raised him after Betty passed. I had spent all day cleaning, polishing the old silver, and making his favorite pot roast. Tiffany had walked in wearing shoes that cost more than my monthly mortgage, her eyes scanning my worn velvet armchair and the faded photos of me in my welding gear, like she was touring a museum of ancient, pathetic history. She didn't shake my hand. She looked at my calloused palms, the skin permanently stained by iron and oil, and she didn't see a man who had built half the skyscrapers in this city. She saw a servant who had overstayed his welcome. "Oh, Darnell," she'd whispered, loud enough for me to hear, as they stood in the narrow hallway. "You didn't tell me your father lived in such a rustic neighborhood. Is it safe to park the car outside?" Instead of defending the home that had sheltered him for 24 years, Darnell had just looked embarrassed. He'd laughed that thin, nervous laugh of his. "It's just for now, babe. He's attached to the old place. You know how the older generation is afraid of change." I didn't know it yet, but that was the first time I felt the anchor of my son's love begin to slip. Over the next year, Tiffany didn't just join our family. She began to curate it. She convinced Darnell that his brand as a rising marketing executive was being diluted by his association with a laborer. She began to rewrite his history. In her version, Darnell's father wasn't a man who broke his back in the trenches to pay for a private university. He was a retired consultant who was eccentric and reclusive. I had played along. I did it because I loved him. When he came to me 3 years ago, begging for help to impress Tiffany's father, Brent, a man who measured a person's worth by the length of their yacht, I had made the biggest mistake of my life. "Dad, Brent is a heavyweight," Darnell had said, pacing my small living room. "He thinks I'm a high flyer, but I can't bring him back to a rental apartment. If I could just show him I have assets. If I could live in Oakview, but he'd bring me into the firm. I'd be set for life. I just need a front." I had looked at my son, seeing the desperation in his eyes, and I had softened. I used a shell company, TNB Holdings, to buy the Oakview mansion. I told him he could live there for $1 a month, provided he kept the place up and respected the legacy of the money that bought it. I told him it was a secret between us, a strategic investment. "I'll make you proud, Dad," he'd promised, hugging me. "I'll have a room ready for you. You'll be the guest of honor every Christmas." What happened next changed everything. The guest of honor quickly became the embarrassing secret. He stopped inviting me to dinners. He stopped answering my calls when Tiffany was around. And then came the ultimate insult. 6 months ago, I had dropped by the house to help him fix a leak in the basement. I didn't want some overpriced contractor charging him thousands for a 10-minute job. As I was walking out, covered in a bit of dust, Brent and Susan had pulled up in their chauffeured car. Darnell had panicked. He didn't introduce me as his father. He'd pointed at me and said, "Thanks for the quick work, Thaddeus. Send the invoice to my secretary." I had stood there, a pipe wrench in my hand, watching my own son tip me $20 like I was a stranger. I had taken the money. I had kept my mouth shut. I wanted to see how far he would go. I wanted to see if there was any of my blood left in him, or if he had completely replaced it with the cold, thin water of Tiffany's social ambitions. The answer had come 10 minutes ago when he called me an anchor. Now, sitting in the truck, I watched the bay window of the mansion. Suddenly, the front door flew open. A man in a white catering jacket walked out onto the porch, looking confused and agitated. He was holding a mobile credit card terminal and waving it toward the sky, as if searching for a signal. Behind him, Darnell appeared, his velvet blazer tight across his shoulders, his face a shade of panicked red that I could see even from the curb. Darnell was shouting something. The caterer was shaking his head, pointing at the screen of the device. I knew exactly what was happening. At Murlum, Reggie had executed the blackout. Every credit card associated with the TNB corporate account, the cards Darnell and Tiffany used to buy their clothes, their groceries, and their dignity had been deactivated. The high-end brunch was currently being served by a company that wasn't getting paid. "What do you mean it's declined?" I could almost hear Darnell's voice through the glass. "Try it again. It's a platinum card." But there was no again. There was only the void. I reached for my phone as it vibrated in my palm. A text from Reggie. "Phase 1 complete. The accounts are frozen. The catering company has been notified that the benefactor has withdrawn support due to breach of contract. But Thaddeus, you might want to look at the street. The retrieval team is more efficient than I anticipated." I looked into my rearview mirror. Around the winding corner of the gated community, 3 massive, heavy-duty tow trucks were rumbling toward us. These weren't the polite, flatbed trucks you see on the highway. These were the snatchers, the kind used for high-value repossessions. They were black, menacing, and equipped with hydraulic lifts that could whisk a car away in under 60 seconds. Leading the pack was a man I knew well, Big Mike. He was the head of the fleet for my construction company. He didn't know Darnell personally, but he knew me. And he knew that when I called for a retrieval, it wasn't a request, it was an order. The tow trucks didn't slow down. They swerved into the driveway, blocking Darnell's black Mercedes and Tiffany's white Lexus SUV. The screech of their air brakes shattered the quiet Christmas morning. Inside the house, the music stopped. I saw the guests, the major players. Darnell was trying to impress crowd toward the window. Brent and Susan were there, their wine glasses frozen at their lips. Darnell exploded out of the house, slipping on a patch of ice as he ran down the stairs. Hey, what the hell are you doing?" He screamed at Big Mike, who was already backing his truck toward the Mercedes. "That's my car. Get that filth out of my driveway." Big Mike didn't even look at him. He hopped out of the cab, a clipboard in his hand. "Darnell Moore?" "Yes. I'm the owner of this house and that car. I'll have you arrested for trespass." Mike didn't flinch. "I have a repossession order for 2 vehicles registered to TNB Holdings. The user agreement was terminated at Murilam AM for conduct detrimental to the asset owner. My orders are to retrieve the vehicles immediately. Use of force is authorized if you interfere." "Detrimental conduct?" Darnell's voice hit a high, shrill note. "I am the director of marketing. I am the user. My father, he's the one who—" He stopped. He looked toward the curb. He saw my rusted Ford F-Mot Chumnumwe idling quietly. He saw me sitting behind the wheel, my face illuminated by the dash lights. In that moment, the first layer of the lie was stripped away. Darnell realized that the anonymous investor wasn't some distant billionaire he could charm. It was the man he had just called an anchor, the man who smelled like sage and grease. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Darnell thought losing the cars was the tragedy. He didn't realize that in exactly 60 minutes, the investor was going to visit the local sheriff's office with a very specific piece of paper. I put the truck in gear and slowly began to roll past the driveway. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I just looked at him, really looked at him, as Big Mike hooked the chains to the axle of the Mercedes. "Dad!" Darnell screamed, his voice cracking as he took a step toward the street. "Dad, wait, let's talk about this." I didn't slow down. I had a phone call to make to the bank. Darnell had spent years telling everyone he was a self-made man. It was time to see how well he could stand when the self was all he had left. As I turned the corner, leaving the sound of Tiffany's high-pitched shrieks behind me, I felt a vibration in my pocket. A new message from an unknown number. I pulled over and opened it. It was a photo of a legal document I had never seen before. It was a petition for emergency guardianship and mental incompetency, filed in the county court 3 days ago. The petitioner was Darnell Moore. The subject was me. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. My son wasn't just trying to distance himself from me. He was trying to have me declared legally insane so he could take full control of the investor's assets before I could ever say no. I didn't know it yet, but the turkey in the trash was the least of my losses. The war wasn't just about the house or the cars. It was about my very life. And my son had already fired the first shot before I even arrived at his door. I sat in the idling truck, the blue light of the smartphone screen illuminating the deep, weathered lines of my face. The image on the screen, the petition for emergency guardianship, felt like a physical blow to my solar plexus, harder than any iron pipe I'd ever swung in a trench. Darnell hadn't just been rude. He hadn't just been an ungrateful brat. He had been a predator. He'd been sitting across from me at our rare Sunday dinners for months, watching me for a slip of the tongue, a forgotten name, or a shaky hand, all so he could weaponize it in court. I looked at the signature on the petition. Not just Darnell's, but Tiffany's too, and the doctor's, a Dr. Eris Thorne. I recognized the name. He was a high society wellness doctor who prescribed vitamin drips and sleep aids to the wealthy for a steep fee. He had never examined me. He had never even met me. Yet here was his medical opinion, stating that I was suffering from rapid onset cognitive decline with paranoid features. I hadn't realized how deep the rot went until that very second. For years, I'd blamed Tiffany for changing him. I'd told myself my boy was still in there somewhere, just buried under silk shirts and expensive scotch. But as I watched him through the rearview mirror, standing in the middle of his snowy driveway while Big Mike's team hoisted his Mercedes into the air, I saw the truth. He wasn't being manipulated. He was a partner in the crime. I put the truck in gear and pulled away from the curb, my mind racing. I needed to see Reggie, and I needed to see him now. As I drove, I thought about the first time I realized my son was looking at me like a bank account instead of a father. It was 2 years ago, right after I'd bought the Oakview property. I'd had a minor dizzy spell dehydration from a double shift supervising a pipeline repair. Darnell had rushed to the hospital, and for a moment, I saw the son I'd raised. He was pale, frantic, clutching my hand. But then, as I was being discharged, I heard him on the phone in the hallway. "It's a minor thing, babe," he'd said to Tiffany, but it got me thinking. The deeds are all in shell companies. If he's incapacitated, we have no legal standing to access the liquidity. We need to start the paperwork for the trust transition. just in case. I'd told myself he was being prudent. I'd told myself he was worried about my legacy. I was a fool. I had spent 50 years working with steel, but I'd been as soft as clay when it came to my boy. I pulled into the parking garage of Reggie's office, a glass and steel monolith downtown that looked like a razor blade cutting into the sky. I didn't wait for the receptionist. I walked straight past her, my work boots clopping heavily on the polished marble floors. I burst into Reggie's corner office. He was standing by the window, a cigar in one hand and a tablet in the other. "I saw the filing, Thaddeus," Reggie said, not even turning around. "I was just about to call you. They moved faster than I thought. They filed the petition 3 days ago in a satellite court 2 counties over. They were trying to keep it off my radar until the hearing on Monday. They want to lock me away, Reggie," I said, my voice thick with a mixture of rage and grief. "They want to put me in a memory care facility while they spend my life's work on beach houses in Champagne. My own son thinks I'm a checkbook with a heartbeat." Reggie turned around, his eyes like 2 pieces of flint. "They don't just want the money, Thaddeus. They want the power. If the judge signs that emergency order on Monday, Darnell becomes the conservator of the estate. He'll have the legal authority to dissolve your shell companies, sell the properties, and most importantly, reverse the blackout you just executed. He can sue T&B Holdings on your behalf, claiming you weren't in your right mind when you authorized the repossession." I sank into one of Reggie's leather chairs. The gravity of the situation was finally sinking in. This wasn't just about a turkey or a fancy house. This was a chess match, where the loser spent the rest of his life in a padded room. "What about the doctor?" I asked. "This Thorne guy, he's never met me." Reggie smirked, a dangerous predatory look. "Thorne is on the payroll of Tiffany's father, Brent. I've been digging, Thaddeus. Brent's heavyweight investment firm on the coast. It's a sinking ship. He's been under investigation for a Ponzi scheme for 6 months. He didn't bring Darnell into the firm to mentor him. He brought him in because he saw Darnell as a pipeline to your money. They're all in on it. They needed a win, and you were the prize. What do? We don't just defend, Thaddeus. We counterattack," Reggie said, leaning over his desk. "Protocol. Z wasn't just about the cars and the credit cards. It was about flushing them out. We let them think they're winning for the next 48 hours. Let them scramble. Let them try to find cash they don't have. And then we give them exactly what they asked for. We give them a meeting." "A meeting? To discuss the guardianship?" "Exactly. Tomorrow is December Heimweh South, Boxing Day. We invite them to my office to negotiate a settlement. We tell them you're willing to discuss a voluntary conservatorship to avoid a public trial. They'll jump at it. They think you're scared. They think the blackout was a last, desperate gasp of a dying mind." I looked at my hands, the scars, the grease under the nails. I thought about the mansion, and I thought about the turkey in the trash. "I'm not scared, Reggie. I'm just done being a father to a stranger." "Good," Reggie said, "because by the time they walk out of that meeting tomorrow, they won't just be broke. They'll be legally radioactive." I left the office and drove back to my small apartment. As I climbed the stairs, my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was standing in her doorway. She looked at me with a strange, pained expression. "Thaddeus," she whispered, "2 men were here earlier. They said they were from the county health department. They were asking questions about you, if you'd been wandering or if you seemed confused. I told them to get lost, but they had badges, Thaddeus." I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. Darnell wasn't waiting for the hearing. He was trying to provoke an incident. He wanted the police to pick me up tonight. If I ended up in a psych ward on a Baymwe High Hour hold, I'd never make it to Reggie's meeting. I thanked Mrs. Gable and went inside, locking the door behind me. I sat in the dark, watching the street from behind the blinds. At Tam, home PM. A black sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. 2 men in suits got out. They didn't look like health department workers. They looked like the kind of private security Brent would hire to handle a problem quietly. They walked up the steps. I heard their heavy footfalls on the landing. My heart was pounding, but I kept my breathing steady. I reached into the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. It wasn't a weapon, but in the right hands, it was more dangerous than a gun. It contained the private cell phone numbers of every city council member, police chief, and judge I'd done favors for over the last 30 years. There was a sharp, aggressive knock on my door. "Mr. Moore, it's the county health team. We're here for a wellness check. Please open the door." I didn't answer. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in a decade, the personal line of the chief of police. "Chief," I said when he picked up, "this is Thaddeus Moore. I have 2 intruders at my door claiming to be county officials. They are currently attempting to bypass my lock. I am recording the interaction for my attorney, Reginald Moss. I'd appreciate a squad car, and I'd appreciate it if you stayed on the line." The knocking stopped. I heard muffled voices on the other side of the door. "He's on the phone with the chief," one of them hissed. "Abort, now." I watched from the window as they scrambled back to their car and sped away. They were gone for now, but the desperation was mounting. Darnell was playing for keeps, and he had no idea that I hadn't even shown my hand yet. But what I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until the next morning, was that Tiffany wasn't just after the money. She had a secret of her own, one that Darnell didn't even know about. A secret that would change the entire trajectory of the war. As the sun began to rise on the morning of the Highway South, I received a frantic call from Big Mike. "Thaddeus, we have a problem," Mike said, his voice strained. "The Mercedes? The one we repossessed from the mansion? We were doing the inventory of the contents before we put it in the secure lot. We found a hidden compartment under the spare tire in the trunk." "And?" I asked, my blood running cold. "It's not just cash, Thaddeus. It's documents. Original blueprints for the city's new water filtration plant, the one your company is bidding on. And they've been marked up with red pen. Thaddeus, it looks like someone was selling the structural vulnerabilities of the city's infrastructure to a foreign buyer." I stared out the window at the gray, winter sky. My son wasn't just a spoiled brat or a gold digger. If those documents were what I thought they were, he was a traitor. And he had used my company, my name, and my resources to do it. The meeting at Reggie's office wasn't just about a guardianship anymore. It was about whether or not I'd have to be the one to send my own son to federal prison. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen, the folder of blueprints spread out across the table like the dissected remains of a murder victim. The red ink marks on the diagrams, detailing the structural weaknesses of the main intake valves, and the backup power grid, felt like blood on my hands. I had spent 30 years of my life ensuring this city's water was safe. Darnell hadn't just been selling out his father. He had been selling out the safety of 3 million people. I looked at the clock. Dam, 40 lamam. The meeting was set for 10. Reggie called me as I was putting on my coat. "The bird is in the air, Thaddeus. Brent, Susan, Tiffany, and Darnell are all confirmed. They're arriving in 2 separate cars rentals, obviously, since Big Mike still has their toys. They think they're coming to sign the papers that will end your independence. Are you ready to see the look on their faces?" "I'm ready, Reggie," I said. "But the blueprints, they change things. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is a crime scene." "I know," Reggie's voice was grim. "I've already contacted my liaisons at the Federal Bureau. They're standing by. But first, we let the villains take the stage. We need to know exactly how far they were willing to go." I drove to the office in silence. The city looked gray and indifferent, oblivious to the fact that its high-flying marketing executive was currently bartering its infrastructure for a chance to stay in a mansion he didn't own. When I walked into Reggie's sprawling conference room on the bone-muy-haned floor, the tension was so thick I could taste the ozone in the air. Darnell and Tiffany were sitting on one side of the massive glass table. Darnell looked haggard, his velvet blazer replaced by a generic sweater, his eyes bloodshot and twitching. Tiffany sat next to him, her chin held high, her white silk dress now wrinkled, but her expression still radiating a toxic, unearned superiority. But it was Brent who dominated the room. He sat at the head of their side, wearing a $1,000 pinstripe suit, his fingers steepled. He didn't look like a man facing a Ponzi scheme investigation. He looked like a kingmaker. "Thaddeus," Brent said, his voice smooth and condescending. "Glad you could make it. It's a shame it had to come to this, but we all have to face the reality of time. Darnell has been very concerned about your lapses. We just want to ensure your legacy is protected." Darnell wouldn't look at me. He stared at the glass table. "It's for your own good, Dad. You're not thinking clearly. The repossessions, the credit card blackouts. Those are the actions of a man who's lost touch with his own interests. We're here to help you step back." I sat down slowly. I didn't say a word. I looked at my son, searching for a single flicker of the boy who used to help me wash my truck on Saturday mornings. I found nothing but a hollowed-out vessel filled with Brent's ambition and Tiffany's greed. Reggie opened a leather portfolio. My client understands your concerns, Reggie said, his voice a masterpiece of faked defeat. He's had a very difficult 24 hours. He's tired. He's considering a voluntary limited conservatorship. He'll retain his personal residence, but Darnell will take over the management of TNB Holdings and its associated liquid assets. I saw Tiffany's eyes light up. A small, hungry smile touched her lips. She looked at Brent, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod of triumph. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me. But, Reggie continued, before we sign anything, Thaddeus has a few questions about the management of certain assets. Specifically, the Mercedes S-Class that was repossessed yesterday. Darnell flinched. The twitch in his eye became a rhythmic beat. The car? What does that have to do with anything? It's a company vehicle. It's irrelevant. Is it? I finally spoke. My voice sounded like gravel grinding together. Because Big Mike found something interesting in the trunk, Darnell. A hidden compartment. Very professional work. Not the kind of thing a marketing director usually needs. The room went deathly silent. Brent's steepled fingers tightened until his knuckles went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Darnell stammered, his voice climbing an octave. Mike probably planted something. He's your goon, Dad. He's probably trying to frame me because you're mad about Christmas. I pulled a thick manila envelope from my bag and slid it across the glass. The blueprints spilled out the intake valves, the power grid, the red-inked vulnerabilities. These were in the car, Darnell, I said. My blueprints. From my secure office at the plant. Blueprints that only 3 people in this city have the clearance to access. And yet, here they are, marked up with notations about where a small, targeted explosion would cause the most systemic failure. Tiffany let out a sharp, forced laugh. Oh, please, blueprints? Darnell is a marketing executive. He probably used them as research for a campaign. You're being paranoid, Thaddeus. This is exactly why we filed the petition. You're seeing conspiracies in every corner. And the bank account in the Cayman Islands, Reggie added, sliding a second set of papers across the table. The one linked to the consulting fee, paid by a front company, for a certain overseas energy conglomerate. The one that received a wire transfer of $500,000 the same day these blueprints went missing. Darnell's face went from pale to a sickly, translucent gray. He looked at Brent, his eyes wide with a silent, screaming plea for help. Brent didn't look back. He stood up, smoothing his jacket. Well, this has taken a turn toward the absurd. Darnell, it seems your father is even more far gone than we feared. These are delusions of grandeur, blueprints, Caymans. It's like a spy novel. We'll see you in court on Monday. The emergency order will be granted, and we'll have a professional medical team evaluate these findings of yours. Sit down. Brent, I said. I'm leaving, Thaddeus. I have a firm to run. You have a firm that's being raided by the SEC as we speak, I said. Brent froze. His hand was on the back of his chair. I didn't just call Reggie yesterday, I continued, standing up to face him. I called a few old friends at the Port Authority and the district attorney's office. You see, I've been laying pipes in this city for 50 years. I've seen where all the bodies are buried literally and figuratively. You thought you could use my son to get into my accounts to cover your losses, but you made a mistake. You let him touch my city's infrastructure. I turned to Darnell. You sold them out, didn't you? You didn't just want the mansion. You wanted to be like him. You wanted the shortcut. Who was the buyer, Darnell? Was it the group Brent introduced you to at that formal brunch? Darnell broke. He didn't just cry. He crumbled. He buried his face in his hands and let out a long, low wail of pure terror. He said it wouldn't hurt anyone, Dad. He said they just wanted to analyze the efficiency for a competing bid. I needed the money, Tiffany. She said, if we didn't have the cash by the end of the year, her father would take her back to the coast. I couldn't lose her. Tiffany's face transformed. The mask of the classy porcelain doll shattered, revealing a snarling, desperate predator. She turned on Darnell, her hand lashing out and slapping him across the face with a crack that echoed in the room. You idiot, she shrieked. You pathetic, weak-willed little worm. You weren't supposed to say anything. You were supposed to let them handle it. She turned to me, her eyes burning with a terrifying cold light. You think you've won, Thaddeus? You think you can just take everything away? I'm pregnant. The room went still. Darnell looked up, his face covered in tears and the red mark of her hand. What? I found out 2 days ago, Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal purr. I'm carrying your grandchild, Thaddeus, the Moore legacy. You want to send the father to prison? You want to leave the mother of your grandchild on the street? Go ahead. See how the press handles the philanthropist who destroyed his own blood. I felt the floor give way beneath me. For a moment, the blueprints and the Caymans and the betrayal didn't matter. A grandchild, a piece of Betty, moving forward into a world I wouldn't see. I looked at Reggie. He looked as stunned as I was. Darnell was staring at Tiffany, a spark of hope, the most dangerous thing in the world, igniting in his eyes. A baby? Tiffany? Really? She ignored him, her gaze fixed entirely on me. She knew she had found my one weakness. She knew that for all my steel and pipe and money, I was still an old man who missed his wife. So, Tiffany said, leaning forward, her voice a poisonous velvet, are we still executing Protocol Z, Thaddeus? Or are we going to talk about a very, very different kind of settlement? I looked at the blueprints on the table, and then I looked at Tiffany's flat stomach. I realized I wasn't just fighting for my company anymore. I was being held hostage by my own hope. But then the door to the conference room opened. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the FBI. It was Big Mike. He was holding a small, clear plastic bag. Inside the bag was a burner phone. Thaddeus, Mike said, his voice grave. You need to see this. We cracked the encryption on the phone found in the hidden compartment. There's a video. It's from 3 days ago. In the mansion. I took the phone. I hit play. The video showed Tiffany and Brent in the kitchen. They didn't know they were being recorded by the Mercedes internal security sync. Are you sure he's not actually pregnant? Brent's voice was clear on the recording. Tiffany's laugh was cold, brittle, and utterly devoid of humanity. Of course not. I had my tubes tied years ago, Dad. Darnell doesn't know. But the old man, he's obsessed with his dead wife. If I tell him there's a baby, he'll fold like a lawn chair. We'll have the conservatorship signed by New Year's, and then we can let the accident happen to Thaddeus. I looked up from the screen. Tiffany's face was frozen. The color was draining from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a ghost. I looked at Darnell. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. You had your tubes tied? I didn't wait for her to answer. I looked at Reggie. Reggie, I said, my voice as cold as the grave. Call the sheriff, and tell the FBI they can come in now. We're done talking. But as the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, Brent did something I didn't expect. He didn't run. He didn't scream. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, black remote. You think I didn't have a backup plan, Thaddeus? Brent said, a maniacal grin spreading across his face. If I go down, the water plant goes with me. I didn't just buy those blueprints for analysis. I already sent my team in. One button, Thaddeus. One button, and your legacy becomes a crater. The silence that followed Brent's threat was so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I looked at the small black remote in his hand, my mind instantly cataloging the internal layout of the north side filtration plant. I knew every valve, every sensor, and every high-pressure line. If Brent was telling the truth, if he had actually managed to plant explosives near the primary intake, he wasn't just threatening my legacy. He was threatening to flood the lower districts and poison the water supply for millions. I didn't know it yet, but the next 10 minutes would determine whether I was remembered as the man who built this city or the man whose pride caused its destruction. You're bluffing, Brent, I said, my voice forced into a calm I didn't truly feel. That plant is a tier-mote secure facility. You don't have the codes. You don't have the access. You're a desperate man holding a garage door opener. Brent's smile didn't falter. It widened, becoming something jagged and ugly. I don't need the codes, Thaddeus. I have the architect's son. Darnell has been inspecting the facility for months, remember? Every time you let him take a learning tour to see the business he'd one day inherit, he was carrying a key card. And every time he came back, he brought me a digital imprint of the security bypass. I turned my gaze to Darnell. My son was huddled in his chair, his hands covering his ears, as if he could drown out the sound of his own life shattering. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look up. The realization hit me like a physical weight. Darnell hadn't just been a fool. He had been a Trojan horse, wheeled into my life's work by a man who saw everything as a commodity to be exploited or destroyed. I didn't know he was going to blow it up, Dad. Darnell wailed, his voice muffled by his palms. He said he just wanted to disrupt the service. A small glitch to make the city council lose faith in your management. Just enough to force a sale of the company to his holding group. He said nobody would get hurt. Nobody would get hurt? I roared, the sound vibrating through the glass table. Darnell, that plant runs on 5,000 pounds of pressurized liquid chlorine. If a seal breaks, if a valve ruptures, the gas cloud alone would kill everyone within 10 blocks. You didn't just sell me out, you signed a death warrant for your neighbors. Tiffany, who had been uncharacteristically silent since the video of her fake pregnancy was exposed, suddenly leaned forward. The panic was gone from her eyes, replaced by a cold, calculating malice. "Give it up, Thaddeus," she spat. "The game is over. Brent is a man of his word. He's already lost his firm. He's already facing a SEC raid. He has nothing left to lose, but you do. You have your precious city. You have your honor. How much is that worth to you today? 10 million? 20? We can stop this, but the price just went up." I looked at the woman my son had chosen to be his partner. She was standing amidst the ruins of her own lies, and her first instinct wasn't to apologize or run, it was to increase the ransom. It was a level of sociopathy that turned my stomach. I didn't know it yet, but the accident they had planned for me wasn't just a future threat, it was active. "The remote, Brent," Reggie said, his hand moving slowly toward the silent alarm button under his desk. "Put it down. The FBI is in the lobby. There's no world where you walk out of here with a check. You're only adding domestic terrorism to your list of charges." "Then we all go down together," Brent screamed. His thumb hovered over the red button. "I'm not going to a federal cage while you sit in your penthouse, Thaddeus. If I don't get the settlement," I press the button. 3 minutes. That's all the delay I set on the charge. 3 minutes, until the North Side plant becomes a memory. The door to the conference room didn't just open, it exploded inward. A flashbang detonated, filling the room with a blinding white light and a roar that felt like a physical punch to the skull. Before the spots cleared from my eyes, the room was swarming with black-clad figures. "FBI, drop the device. Drop it now." I was shoved to the floor by Big Mike, his massive body shielding mine. I heard the scuffle of boots on glass, the heavy thud of a body hitting the table, and the metallic clatter of the remote sliding across the floor. Through the ringing in my ears, I saw a tactical agent pin Brent to the glass table, his arm twisted at an impossible angle. But Brent wasn't screaming in pain, he was laughing. "You're too late," Brent choked out, his face pressed against the glass. "I already armed it. The signal was sent the moment you burst in. The failsafe is tripped. Look at the monitors, Thaddeus. Look at your masterpiece burn." I scrambled to my feet, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. On the far wall, Reggie's multi-screen display was still tied into the municipal grid. I watched the live feed from the North Side plant. At first, everything looked normal, the massive silver vats, the humming turbines. Then, the warning lights began to flash. A deep, rhythmic pulsing of crimson light filled the screen. On the telemetry side, the pressure in the primary intake manifold began to climb. It was rising at a vertical rate, bypassing the safety thresholds. "150 psi. High jum. Ba jum." The alarms were blaring through the speakers of the monitor, a shrill, incessant screaming that sounded like the city itself was in pain. "I have to get there," I said, lunging toward the door. "Thaddeus, no," Reggie grabbed my arm. "The area is being evacuated. You can't go in there." "I built that system," I shouted, shaking him off. "There's a manual override in the sub-basement. If the digital fail-safes are compromised, I'm the only one who knows how to bleed the pressure without triggering a rupture. If I don't go, that plant is a bomb." I didn't wait for permission. I didn't wait for the FBI to finish handcuffing Brent or Tiffany. I sprinted for the elevators, Big Mike right on my heels. As the doors slid shut, I caught one last glimpse of my son. Darnell was sitting on the floor, surrounded by agents, his face a mask of utter, hollow defeat. He had wanted a life of luxury and power, and instead, he had become the fuse for a catastrophe. We hit the lobby at a dead run. My old Ford truck was parked at the curb, and I didn't care about traffic laws or red lights. I drove like a man possessed, the engine of the 20-year-old F-150 screaming as I pushed it past 80 miles per hour on the city streets. What happened next changed the stakes again. As we tore toward the industrial district, my phone buzzed in the center console. It was a restricted number. I threw it on speaker. "Thaddeus," a voice said. It was cold, professional, and entirely unfamiliar. "You're heading to the North Side plant. That's a mistake." Brent was the distractant, Thaddeus. He's a greedy amateur. We didn't want the plant. We wanted the server farm in the basement. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The filtration plant sat directly atop the city's primary data hub, the place where every financial record, every deed, and every piece of encrypted municipal data was stored. "Who is this?" I demanded. "It doesn't matter," the voice replied. "What matters is that the pressure spike Brent triggered isn't going to blow the plant. It's going to trigger the Halon fire suppression system in the server vaults. Once that Halon is released, every person in that basement will suffocate in seconds. And your son, well, he wasn't alone when he took his tours, Thaddeus. He brought a trainee with him last week, a young man named Leo." I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew Leo. He was the son of one of my longest-serving foremen. He was a good kid, barely 20 years old. Darnell had told me he was mentoring him. "Leo is still in the vault," the voice continued. "He's currently locked in the server room, trying to fix the glitch Darnell told him about. You have 90 seconds until the Halon clears the room. Do you save your legacy, Thaddeus? Or do you save the boy your son used as bait?" I looked at the turnoff for the main plant, and then at the service entrance for the vaults. I couldn't do both. If I saved the boy, the plant might still rupture. If I saved the plant, Leo would die in the dark, gasping for air that wasn't there. I pulled the wheel hard to the left, the tires of the Ford screaming. I didn't know it yet, but the betrayal was about to get even more personal. Because as I screeched to a halt at the service entrance, I saw a car I recognized. It was Brent's second car, the one Susan, Tiffany's mother, usually drove. And she wasn't alone. She was standing at the keypad, her fingers flying over the buttons, a look of grim determination on her face. She wasn't a victim of Brent's scheme. She was the one holding the door shut. I jumped out of the truck before the tires had even stopped spinning against the gravel of the service entrance. The industrial sirens were a rhythmic, deafening scream now, echoing off the concrete walls of the filtration plant. In the distance, the main facility was venting steam in great, violent plumes, but my eyes were locked on the small, reinforced steel door of the data hub. And Susan, Tiffany's mother, the woman who had spent the last year looking at me like I was something she'd accidentally stepped in on a sidewalk, was standing at the security keypad. She wasn't wearing her designer cashmere today. She was in a heavy utility jacket, her face tight, her eyes darting between the digital display and the shadows of the alleyway. She was punching in a sequence of codes with a precision that didn't belong to a coastal socialite. "Susan!" I roared, my voice barely carrying over the roar of the turbines. "Step away from the door." She didn't jump. She didn't even flinch. She slowly turned her head, looking at me with a cold, terrifying indifference. "You're a hard man to kill, Thaddeus," she said. Her voice wasn't the airy, melodic trill she used at brunch. It was flat, metallic, and devoid of any humanity. "Darnell was supposed to keep you at the office. Brent was supposed to keep you distracted. You were never meant to be the variable that survived." Big Mike moved to step forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over her, but I held up a hand. I saw the glint of silver in her left hand, a master override key that only the city's highest-level contractors possessed. "The boy," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Leo is in there. He's just a kid, Susan. He has nothing to do with your husband's debts or your daughter's greed. Let him out." Susan looked at the keypad. The red light was pulsing faster now. "Leo is an unfortunate necessity," she said. "He's currently the only person with a live biometric signature inside the vault. The system needs a body in there to keep the fire suppression logic active. If I open that door, the Halen stops, the servers stay online, and the digital trail of our investments remains intact for the feds to find. If I keep it shut, the gas clears the room, and the hard drives are wiped clean by the thermal surge." I didn't know it yet, but Susan hadn't just been Brent's wife. She was the one who had built the shell companies. She was the one who had scouted Darnell as the perfect, pliable idiot to provide the physical access they needed. Brent was the face, Tiffany was the bait, but Susan was the architect. "You're going to kill a 20-year-old boy to hide your bank records?" I asked, taking a slow step toward her. "I'm going to save my family, Thaddeus," she snapped. "Something you clearly don't understand. Now, stay back. In 60 seconds, the Halen vents. If you try to touch this keypad, I'll trigger the manual lockdown. Then even God won't be able to open that door for 24 hours." I looked at the steel door. It was 3 inches of reinforced alloy. Beyond it, Leo was probably banging on the glass, wondering why his mentor's father was standing outside while the air began to thin. I felt a wave of rock-bottom despair. My son had handed these monsters the keys to our city. He had handed them the life of a boy who looked up to him. I looked at Big Mike. He saw the look in my eyes. He knew what I was thinking. I had spent 50 years working with the veins of this city. I knew that every high-security system had a physical bypass, something that didn't rely on codes or keycards. "Mike," I whispered. "The intake vent, 3 feet to the left of the door, the emergency pressure relief valve." Mike's eyes widened. "Thaddeus, if we pull that, the pressure in the manifold will backflow. It'll blow the seals on the main chlorine tanks at the plant." "I know," I said, "but it'll also create a vacuum in the server room. It'll suck the halon out before it reaches the floor. It's the only way to give Leo air." Susan saw us looking at the vent. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare. You'll destroy the entire facility." "Then you better start running, Susan," I said, my voice dropping into that deep, iron-heavy tone that used to make my welding crews go silent. "Because I'm about to break your machine." I didn't wait. I lunged for the manual lever of the relief valve. Susan shrieked, reaching for her pocket. I expected a weapon, maybe a small pistol, but instead, she pulled out a second remote. She wasn't just holding the door, she was the fail-safe. "If you pull that lever, I detonate the primary manifold," she screamed. "I'll take the whole block with me." Everything slowed down. I saw the sweat on her upper lip. I saw the tremor in her hand. She was bluffing about the detonation she wanted to live, but she wasn't bluffing about the lockdown. I didn't know it yet, but I wasn't just playing for Leo's life. I was playing for my son's soul. Because at that moment, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness of the service drive. A rental car screeched to a halt behind my truck. Darnell jumped out. He looked like he'd crawled out of a wreck. His tuxedo was torn, his face was bruised from the scuffle at the gala, and he was shaking so hard he could barely stand. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Susan. "Susan, stop," Darnell shouted, his voice cracking with a desperate, raw agony. "Tiffany told me. She told me everything on the way to the precinct. She told me you were the one who suggested the tours. You knew I was bringing Leo. You knew he'd be the one trapped if things went wrong." Susan didn't even look at him. "Go back to the car, Darnell. You've done your part. Be a man for once, and let the adults finish this." "A man?" Darnell stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the steel door. "I brought that kid here, Susan. I told him he was helping me with a high-level security audit. I gave him my spare keycard. I told him I'd be right behind him." He turned to me, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the marketing executive. I didn't see the classy son. I saw the boy who used to hide behind my legs when he was scared. "Dad," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know they were this. I didn't know." "Darnell," I said, "the vent. I need you to hold the secondary bypass. If I pull the main lever, the kickback will break my arm. I need your strength." Darnell didn't hesitate. He ignored Susan's threats. He ignored the sirens. He stepped up beside me and grabbed the heavy iron handle of the secondary bypass. He gripped it with the same calloused intensity I'd used for 40 years. "On 3, I said. 1, Darnell counted. 2, I said. Susan lunged forward, her fingers clawing at Darnell's face, trying to pull him away. "You're throwing it all away. The money, the future. You'll go to prison for this." "I'm already in prison, Susan," Darnell roared, his voice finally finding its iron. 3. We pulled together. The sound was a deafening, metallic groan as the heavy iron gears, rusted from years of neglect, finally turned. A massive hiss of escaping air erupted from the vent, a white cloud of pressure-equalized steam that knocked Susan backward into the gravel. Inside the vault, the logic failed. The halon gas, which had just begun to hiss from the ceiling vents, was sucked upward into the vacuum we'd created. I heard the heavy thunk of the electromagnetic locks disengaging as the system switched to emergency recovery mode. The steel door swung open. Leo stumbled out, coughing, his face pale and eyes wide with terror. He collapsed onto the gravel, gasping for the freezing winter air. Big Mike was on him in a second, wrapping him in a heavy work jacket. Darnell stood over the boy, his hands still shaking, his chest heaving. He looked at Leo, then at the open door of the vault, where the servers, the evidence of Susan's crimes, were still whirring, untouched by the fire suppression gas. He had saved the boy, but he had also sealed his own fate. By opening that door, he had ensured that the digital trail of his own involvement would be preserved for the FBI. Susan scrambled to her feet, her hair a wild mess, her face contorted with a silent, murderous rage. She looked at the open door, then at the sirens, now reflecting off the glass of the main plant. She realized it was over. The data hadn't been wiped. The boy hadn't died. The accident had failed. "You've killed us all," she hissed at Darnell. "Your wife, your father, your precious legacy. You're going to rot in a cage for the rest of your life." Darnell looked at her, and then he looked at me. He didn't look like he was afraid of the cage anymore. He looked like he was finally standing on his own 2 feet. "Maybe," Darnell said, "but at least I'll be my father's son when I'm in there." I stepped forward and put a heavy, calloused hand on Darnell's shoulder. It was the first time I'd touched him with love in years. He leaned into it, a small, broken sob escaping his throat. But as the FBI tactical teams swarmed the service drive, weapons drawn, I looked back at the main filtration plant. The steam plumes were turning a dark, sickly yellow. The backflow I'd triggered to save Leo. It hadn't just blown the seals. It had cracked the primary chlorine tank. "Mike," I yelled, "get Leo out of here! Darnell, get to the truck, now!" "What about you, Dad?" Darnell asked, his eyes wide. "The main valve," I said, looking toward the yellow cloud rising into the night sky. "If I don't close it manually, that gas hits the residential district in 5 minutes. Thousands will die." I didn't know it yet, but the final test of Protocol Z wasn't about revenge. It was about sacrifice. And as I ran toward the yellow haze, I realized that my son wasn't going to let me go alone. "I'm an engineer too, Dad," Darnell shouted, sprinting after me into the toxic mist. "You taught me how to fix things. Now let's go fix this." We ran into the cloud together. The father who had lost his son, and the son who had finally found his father, headed straight into the heart of the disaster we had both helped create. What happened inside that yellow haze would change the Moore name forever, and it would provide the one thing I thought was impossible, a way for Darnell to truly pay his debt. The yellow fog wasn't just a color, it was a physical weight. It tasted like burnt pennies and bleach, a sharp, acidic bite that clawed at the back of my throat the moment we breached the perimeter of the main intake station. I'd spent my life in the belly of this city, and I knew exactly what that smell meant: chlorine gas. One good lungful would turn your insides into a chemical soup. "Darnell, stop," I barked, grabbing the sleeve of his torn tuxedo. I ripped the silk handkerchief from my pocket and pulled a second one from my belt, a habit of an old laborer who always expects a spill. "Wet these. Use the runoff from that cooling pipe. Breathe through the fabric and stay low. The gas is heavy. It'll pool on the floor first." Darnell did as he was told. He didn't question me. He didn't complain about his expensive clothes or his ruined shoes. He soaked the rags and pressed one to his face, his eyes wide and watering above the fabric. I saw the terror in him, but beneath it, I saw something else, a spark of the iron I'd spent decades trying to forge into his soul. "Follow my footsteps," I grunted, my own lungs already beginning to burn. "We have to reach the manual override on the primary manifold. If the pressure isn't bled off in 60 seconds, the secondary tank will blow, and this whole district becomes a ghost town." We stumbled through the haze, the world reduced to a jumble of pipes, shadows, and the deafening, rhythmic scream of the alarms. Every step felt like walking through a dream, the yellow mist swallowing the light from the emergency beacons. My 70-year-old knees screamed in protest, but I pushed forward. I hadn't built this city just to watch my son's vanity burn it down. We reached the central valve. It was a massive iron wheel, 6 feet in diameter, coated in a layer of frost from the escaping pressurized gas. The pipe was vibrating with a low-frequency hum that shook the very marrow of my bones. "Grab the left side," I shouted over the roar of the venting steam. "We have to turn it clockwise to bypass the manifold. On my count." We threw our weight against the wheel. It didn't budge. It was seized, locked tight by the backflow pressure I'd triggered to save Leo. I felt a surge of panic. This was the moment. This was where the Moore legacy ended, not in a boardroom or a mansion, but here in the dark, suffocating on a mistake. "It's stuck, Dad," Darnell choked out, his voice muffled by the wet rag. He was straining, his face turning a dark, dangerous purple, the muscles in his neck standing out like cables. "Push, Darnell. Everything you've got. Think about the boy. Think about the city." Darnell let out a roar, a raw, visceral sound of pure, unadulterated effort. He wasn't the senior vice president of a marketing firm anymore. He wasn't the man who wanted velvet blazers and scotch. He was a laborer. He was my son. With a sickening, metallic crack, the seal broke. The wheel began to turn, slowly at first, then faster, as the pressure began to vent into the secondary containment chamber. I heard the hiss of the gas shifting, the tone of the sirens changing as the sensors detected the bypass. But as the wheel spun, the secondary pressure relief valve, a smaller, brass fitting right above Darnell's head, gave way. A jet of concentrated chlorine gas sprayed out, hitting Darnell squarely in the shoulder and neck. He didn't let go. He stayed on the wheel, screaming through the rag as the chemical burned through his tuxedo and into his skin. He kept turning, his hands raw and bleeding against the cold iron, until the valve hit the stop. The roar of the venting gas died down to a low, defeated whistle. The yellow fog began to dissipate, sucked away by the emergency fans that had finally kicked in. Darnell collapsed. I caught him before he hit the concrete, lowering him gently as the air began to clear. His tuxedo was rags, his skin was blistered and red, and he was gasping for air, his lungs struggling against the chemical damage. "You did it, son," I whispered, pulling the rag from his face. "You saved them." Darnell looked up at me, his eyes unfocused and swimming with tears. Did I fix it, Dad?" "You fixed it," I said, my voice breaking. I didn't know it yet, but the reversal wasn't just about the gas. 10 minutes later, the hazmat teams and the FBI tactical units swarmed the valve room. They found us sitting there on the cold floor, an old man and his broken son, surrounded by the evidence of a catastrophe that hadn't happened. As they loaded Darnell onto a stretcher, an FBI agent, a stern woman named Special Agent Vance, walked up to me. She was holding a tablet, her face unreadable. "Mr. Moore," she said, "we've finished the preliminary sweep of the server farm. Susan Miller is in custody. She's already trying to cut a deal, blaming everything on Brent and your son." "And the evidence?" I asked, looking at Darnell, as they placed an oxygen mask over his face. "The digital trail is intact," Vance said. "But we found something else. Something Susan didn't know about. Darnell didn't just give them access, Thaddeus. He'd been recording every meeting he had with Brent for the last 3 months. He had a hidden cloud drive where he'd uploaded audio files of Brent discussing the disruption of the plant. He'd even recorded the moment Susan suggested using Leo as the fall guy. I looked at my son. He was being wheeled away, his hand feebly reaching out toward me. He hadn't just been a fool. He had been a man trying to find a way out of a trap he'd built for himself. He had been gathering the rope to hang the Millers before they could hang him. He was going to go to the authorities on the Highmoy South. Vance continued. He'd already drafted a confession. He was willing to go to prison just to stop them. He didn't move fast enough. I felt a weight lift off my chest, replaced by a sharp, stinging regret. I had executed Protocol Z to dismantle my son's life, thinking he was the villain of the story. I had treated him like a stranger, like an enemy, and while he had been weak, and he had been greedy, he had been trying to find his way back to the man I'd raised him to be. But the final twist was yet to come. As they cleared the area, I saw Tiffany being led to a police cruiser in the distance. She saw me, and for a fleeting second, the rage was gone, replaced by a look of sheer, calculating terror. She knew the recording existed. She knew her mother was talking. She leaned toward the officer holding her arm and whispered something. The officer looked startled, then looked toward me. The officer walked over, his face grim. "Mr. Moore, your daughter-in-law just made a statement. She claims that the secret she mentioned in the office, the one about her tubes being tied, she says it was a lie she told her father to get him to back off her. She says she is pregnant, Thaddeus. And she says she has the medical records in her purse to prove it." I looked at the cruiser, where Tiffany sat, her face a mask of cold triumph once again. She was playing the final card. She was gambling that even after everything, I couldn't walk away from a grandchild. I looked at Reggie, who had just arrived at the scene, his suit covered in soot. "Is it true, Reggie?" "We'll find out," Reggie said. "But Thaddeus, if it is true, she's going to use that baby as a shield for the next 20 years. She'll use it to stay out of a cell. She'll use it to keep a leash on Darnell. She'll use it to get back into your pockets." I looked at my son, who was being loaded into an ambulance, his body broken, but his soul finally visible. Then I looked at Tiffany, the predator in the back seat of a cop car. I realized then that the revenge was over, the dismantling was complete, but the resolution was going to be the hardest part of all. Because to save my grandson, I might have to become the very thing Darnell called me on Christmas morning. I might have to become the anchor that holds them all underwater. The hospital wing reserved for inmates was a place of gray linoleum and the constant, rhythmic hum of industrial air filters. It didn't smell like Christmas. It smelled like bleach and the cold, sterile reality of a life gone wrong. I sat in a plastic chair by Darnell's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. His skin was still mottled from the chemical burns, and he breathed with the help of an oxygen concentrator, but he was alive. I looked at his hands, resting on top of the thin hospital blanket. They were bandaged, the skin raw from the frozen iron of the valve wheel. For the first time in 10 years, his nails weren't perfectly manicured. They were the hands of a man who had finally done some honest work, even if it had nearly cost him his life. "He's stable, Thaddeus," Reggie said, stepping into the room. He looked as tired as I felt, his expensive suit wrinkled and smelling of the soot from the plant. "The doctors say the lung damage is significant, but not permanent. He'll be transferred to the county detention infirmary by tomorrow morning." "And the Millers?" I asked, not taking my eyes off my son. "Brent and Susan are done," Reggie stated with a grim finality. "Between the FBI's records of the Ponzi scheme and the recordings Darnell made of the conspiracy to sabotage the plant, they're looking at 20 years to life. Domestic terrorism charges are being discussed. They'll never see the outside of a federal cage again. And Tiffany." Reggie hesitated. He pulled a thin folder from his briefcase and laid it on the rolling bedside table. "That's where it gets complicated. She's playing the pregnancy card. She produced a positive test and a set of medical records from a clinic on the coast. The DA is hesitant to push for a harsh pretrial detention for a pregnant woman, even with the arson attempt. She's currently being held in a minimum security medical wing, screaming for her rights and demanding to speak to you." I felt that familiar, heavy ache in my chest. A grandchild, the Moore name, continuing on. I looked at the folder. It contained the proof she had offered. I didn't know it yet, but this was the final trap Tiffany had set. Her last-ditch effort to keep her claws in the Moore fortune. "I need to see her, Reggie," I said, "and I need you to bring Silas." The meeting took place in a glass-walled visitation room at the county facility. Tiffany sat across from me, her prison grays a jarring contrast to the white silk dress she'd worn on Christmas. She didn't look broken. She looked smug. She rested her hands on her stomach in a protective gesture that felt entirely too theatrical. "I knew you'd come, Thaddeus," she purred, her voice regaining that poisonous honey drip quality. "I told the guards you couldn't stay away from your own blood. You're an old-fashioned man. You care about legacy." "I care about the truth, Tiffany," I said. "The truth is right here," she said, tapping the medical documents on the table. "I'm 8 weeks along. Darnell's baby. Your grandson. Now, let's talk about my bail. And the charges. I want them dropped. I want a house, not in Oakview, somewhere better, and a monthly stipend. If I'm going to raise a Moore, I'm going to do it in style." I looked at Silas, who was standing in the corner of the room. Silas, the former detective who had spent 48 hours digging into every corner of Tiffany's life that she thought she'd buried. "Silas," I prompted. Silas stepped forward and dropped a second folder onto the table. It was thick, filled with grainy black and white printouts and digital timestamps. "Tiffany Moore, formerly Tiffany Vance," Silas began, his voice like gravel. "You've been busy, Tiffany. We tracked the clinic on the coast. It's a front. It's owned by a man named Chad, an old college boyfriend of yours, who specializes in digital document restoration. He didn't just give you a positive test. He gave you a full medical history for a pregnancy that doesn't exist." Tiffany's smile faltered, just for a heartbeat. "That's a lie. You're trying to intimidate me." "We didn't just find the fake records, Tiffany," I said, leaning forward. "We found the real ones. From the surgical center in Napa, 3 years ago. The ones that confirm you had a tubal ligation after your first marriage ended. You told Darnell it was a minor procedure for a cyst. You lied to him from the very beginning." Tiffany's face transformed. The porcelain doll was gone. The classy socialite was gone. What was left was a cornered animal, baring its teeth. She lunged across the table, her fingernails clawing for my eyes, but Silas was faster. He caught her wrists and forced her back into her chair. "You old monster!" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You have $60 million. You have everything. Why do you care if I lie? You owe us." Darnell and I were supposed to be the new elite. We were supposed to be the ones everyone looked up to. "You were supposed to be my family," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "I would have given you the 60 million, Tiffany. I would have given you the world if you had just given me a shred of honesty, if you had just opened that door on Christmas and treated me like a human being." "You were a laborer," she spat, her face contorted with a hideous, visceral disgust. "You smelled like the sewer. You were a blight on our brand." "Then I guess it's a good thing I've decided to retire the brand," I said. I stood up and turned to Reggie. "Execute the final phase. Everything we discussed. I want it done by New Year's Day." 1 year later, the snow fell softly over the city, blanketing the south side in a quiet, peaceful white. I pulled my rusted Ford F-Mot Chamnamui up to the curb of a newly renovated brick building. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have heated driveways or crystal chandeliers. But above the door, a sign hung in the winter air, illuminated by warm, amber lights. The Betty Moore Youth Center. I walked inside carrying a 20-pound turkey. The air was filled with the sound of laughter and the smell of sage and rosemary. There were 30 kids inside, kids from the neighborhood, kids who knew what it was like to have nothing. They were sitting at long communal tables, their faces bright with the kind of hope you can't buy with a credit card. Reggie was there, wearing a ridiculous Santa hat, and arguing with a 12-year-old about the best way to weld a structural joint. Big Mike was in the kitchen, carving a second bird. It was a family. Not the one I'd been born with, and not the one I'd tried to buy for Darnell, but the one I'd earned. I felt a presence beside me. I turned to see Darnell. He looked different. He'd spent 6 months in a minimum security facility after taking a plea deal. He'd testified against Brent and Susan, providing the final nails in their legal coffins. He'd lost his velvet blazers, his marketing title, and his wife Tiffany was currently serving 5 years for attempted arson and fraud. But as I looked at him, I saw a man. He was wearing work dungarees and a heavy flannel shirt. His hands were scarred and his eyes were clear. He was working as a junior foreman for my old construction firm, starting at the bottom, just like I had. "The turkey smells good, Dad," Darnell said. He didn't call me an anchor. He didn't look at my truck with disgust. He reached out and took the heavy bird from my arms, his strength steady and real. "It's Mom's recipe," I said. "I thought we'd keep the tradition going." Darnell nodded, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. I'd like that a lot." We walked toward the table together. I had dismantled his life to save his soul, and it had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. I'd used Protocol Z to burn down a forest of lies. But in the clearing left behind, something new was finally growing. I sat down at the head of the table, surrounded by the noise and the love of 100 people who didn't care about my bank account. I looked at my son, who was laughing with a young student about a plumbing mistake he'd made on his first day on the job. I didn't know it yet, but this was the greatest investment I'd ever made. "My name is Thaddeus Moore. I am 71 years old. I am a laborer, an engineer, and a father." And as I looked at the warmth in that room, I realized that the best way to handle an anchor isn't to cut it loose, it's to make sure it's hooked into something that actually matters. I reached for my glass and raised it high. "To family," I said. "To family," the room roared back. And for the first time in a long, long time, I knew exactly what that word meant.